The point guard, also known as the one or the floor general, is a position in basketball that tends to be the shortest, quickest, and fastest player on the court that possesses a very unique skill set. And the reason for this has to do with their role and responsibility on the team. Point guards dominate the ball, make the decisions, and distribute, so being an elite level ball handler, playmaker, passer, but more importantly, knowing your way around the offense is necessary. And these are skill sets that we have seen players at this position possess dating all the way back to the 50s. However, things have vastly changed. So much so that many people would argue out of all 5 positions, the point guard position has evolved the most over the course of 70 years. And leading the charge are players such as Russell Westbrook, Damian Lillard, and Stephen Curry. And in this video, I will discuss everything that led up to this massive shift. But before I do that, let me give a huge shout out to today's sponsors. And still don't really have any sponsors for this type of video, which is pretty odd. However, I do want to give a shout out to my second channel. A lot of people have told me over the past few months that I should make a second channel to be a bit more personality based. So that link is in the description. And speaking of me being a bit more personality based, there is also a link in the description to a podcast that I've started with a good friend of mine, Agent Zero, where there again, I'm way more personality based. It's more than just basketball, and you get to know me a little bit better. And on top of that, there's a lot of people who say they enjoy it thoroughly, so make sure you click both of those links in the description. But with all that being said, let's get right to it and discuss the evolution of the point guard position. So first, we start with our forefathers, the innovators, the players who laid down the groundwork and the blueprint for many other point guards to follow in the following years. And to be completely honest with you, there really wasn't that much innovation that happened at the point guard position in the first 2 to 3 decades in the NBA. And the reason for this is simple. The league was not built for smaller players to dominate at that time. However, I'll touch upon this later on. Because of this, there's only a handful of players who had any lasting impact, players such as Guy Rodgers, Lenny Wilkens, and I would be highly upset with myself if I didn't bring up Kenny Sailors, who is credited for inventing the jump shot. However, it's undeniable between the 50s and 60s, the 3 most influential point guards in the league were Bob Cousy, Oscar Robertson, and Jerry West. First, we have Bob Cousy, who was a pass-first point guard and was very instrumental in different passing styles, especially the ones that were a bit more flamboyant to the game. And Cousy's influence and impact would only increase further as soon as Bill Russell entered the league. Because thanks to Russell's famous outlet passes, as well as Cousy's ability to find the open man, the duo is credited for inventing and popularizing the concept of a fast break, which not only changed the game of basketball forever and is a concept that many players still utilize to this day, but also gave those Celtics a massive advantage that translated to an amount of success that quite frankly may never be matched again. Next, you have Oscar Robertson, who was able to impact the game in various ways. He was an amazing scorer and highly efficient, which is something that was basically unheard of at that time for a smaller guard to consistently shoot in the high 40s. Also, he recorded an impressive amount of assists, and then finally he would impact the game on the boards as well, to the point where we all know famously Oscar Robertson is known for recording triple doubles. And when it comes to playing styles, many people credit the Big O for perfecting fadeaway jumpers and pump fakes. And finally, we have Jerry West, who was more of a scoring guard, but still was impactful when it came to facilitating the ball, especially later on in his career when he had more scoring threats around him. Jerry West was an ambitious scorer, especially with his crafty drives to the basket, as well as his sweet shooting touch from outside. Actually, many people believe that the core fundamentals of a great shooting form originated from Jerry West. And because of this, very similar to Oscar Robertson, West was not only a prolific scorer, but highly efficient. However, I would argue the biggest impact that Jerry West had to the game is proving that you can be a guard and still be very influential on your team's success, which at that time was definitely unheard of. But even with that said, Jerry West still needed a dominant figure down low to finally win the championship. Which brings me to my original point of lack of innovation. During the early stages of NBA history, quite frankly, the concept of scoring was to get the ball as close as you can to the basket, which for guards was nearly impossible, especially because the NBA didn't widen the lane to 16 feet until 1965. Also, the league was very strict on ball handlers on what they wouldn't allow when it came to dribble moves, which is why when you go back and you look at some of the earlier stages of dribble moves, everyone looks really stiff, because if you were to slightly move your palm to the right or left for the ball, or God forbid you actually lost control of the ball and tried to regain it, More than likely, the referees were going to call some type of violation. But more importantly, there was no three-point line, so the concept of spacing was non-existent, which has always been a catalyst for point guards dominating in any era. This belief was so undeniable that even George Mikan, who was a big man, thoroughly believed that the game should introduce a three-point line to not only raise the entertainment level for the audience, but also give a fair chance for smaller players to be impactful at the game. Which perfectly leads us to the next decade of evolution, because the expansion of style that we saw from the point guard position really started to be highlighted not only in the NBA, but also in the ABA, where George Mikan was a commissioner. Leading the charge of influence in the ABA were point guards such as Matt Calvin and Don Buzzi. However, the player who stood out the most was a 6-foot guard who played for the Kentucky Colonels in Louis Dampier. Dampier, for a short window of time, gave us a glimpse of what the future was going to look like in the NBA. Because during the 1969 and 1970 season, Dampier would go on to average roughly around 25 to 26 points per game while shooting 35% from three on 7 3-point attempts. Yeah, 7, back in the early 70s. But what's even more important is that the Colonels were actually a winning team, making postseason appearances while Dampier was executing this style of play. And the innovation doesn't stop there. Over in the NBA, it became way more common for smaller guards to be impactful in the league. Players such as Kevin Porter, Norm Van Lier, Calvin Murphy, but more importantly, the amount of point guards who had a massive influence in the box score as well as in their team success expanded way more than it once was in the 50s and 60s. Point guards such as Dave Bing and Nate Archibald could dominate the box score, especially when it comes to their scoring output, as in their prime years they were averaging north of 25 points per game. And specifically when it comes to Tiny Archibald, not only was he a scoring champion in 1973, averaging 34 points a game, but he also led the NBA in assists, averaging 11 per game, while standing at only 6'1". Unfortunately for Nate Archibald and Dave Bing, the gaudy numbers never really translated to any significant team success, so eventually both of them had to make adjustments to their game, especially Nate Archibald, who suffered a torn Achilles that significantly altered his career during the 1977 season. But then on the other hand, you have other great point guards such as JoJo White and Walt Frazier, who were heavily influential in their team's success, and they did so with more of a well-rounded game. Both players could give you somewhere around 18 to 23 points in their primes, as well as recording 5 to 7 assists. And in particular to Walt Frazier, he could also impact the game on the boards, recording around 5 or 7 a game, as well as being an elite level defender, as he was selected to 7 all-defensive teams. But in my opinion, the point guard who had the most influence and impact during the 70s has to be Gus Williams, who played in the backcourt with Dennis Johnson, who many people would view as a point guard as well, as he was highly successful at that role with the Boston Celtics during the 80s. Both Gus Williams and Dennis Johnson were backcourt mates in Seattle, and they were highly successful, leading their team to multiple 50-win seasons, as well as an NBA championship in 1979. Now, before we go to the next stretch of years, I do want to point out something very important that I realized while doing research for this video. I find it very interesting when people make claims of what a true or traditional point guard is supposed to do. The reason for this is because if you actually go back in NBA history and look at all of the great point guards in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, all of the elite level point guards are very well rounded, most of which were reliable scoring options. However, all of that changed during the 80s and early 90s, as the league became more liberal on what they considered to be an assist. Personal assist numbers for point guards skyrocketed, and averaging 9, 10 plus assists became more common. And while this was going on, scoring output started to decline, thus popularizing the identity of being a pass-first point guard. Players such as Terry Porter, Kevin Johnson, Mark Jackson, Norm Nixon, and Maurice Cheeks really took over the league and started to play pivotal roles on all winning franchises. However, the 3 most influential players during this stretch of years has to be John Stockton, Isaiah Thomas, and Magic Johnson. Stockton was a 6'1" point guard who spent his near 2-decade career all playing for the Utah Jazz. While in Utah, Stockton and Malone popularized a playing style that has taken over the league over the past few years, and that is a pick and roll. With an elite finishing touch that Malone had, as well as the patience and intelligence to make timely passes to him from Stockton, John Stockton ended his career with an impressive amount of assists. So impressive that Stockton not only has the most assists in NBA history, but he holds that record by a fairly wide margin. Also, to a lesser degree, another player who helped popularize the pick and roll was Mark Price, who was a point guard who played for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and even though his run was short-lived due to injuries, Mark Price took a more modern approach to how the pick and roll should be executed. Now, personally, I find Price's career so intriguing that I actually made a separate video for him, because in my honest opinion, I believe he is one of the more overlooked and underappreciated point guards in NBA history. So make sure you go check that out. Then we have Isaiah Thomas, one of the more well-known players in NBA history, who was a 6'1" guard who spent his entire career playing for the Pistons. However, I do believe a stage in his career that is vastly overlooked is the numbers that he was posting up early on in his career. Quite frankly, it's pretty impressive to me that no one actually brings up the fact that for a 5-year stretch, Isaiah Thomas was averaging roughly 21 points and 11 assists on a Pistons team that didn't feature any other all-time great player. However, putting up all-time great numbers is not what Isaiah Thomas is known for. Zeke was lightning quick, fast, and a great decision maker, and his career really took off during the mid to late 80s as the Detroit Pistons started to shift their identity to a more defensive-centric team, and on the offensive end, they became way more well-rounded instead of just overly depending on Isaiah Thomas to create offense for everyone. Because of this, Isaiah Thomas's numbers did decrease. However, in return, he was rewarded with 2 NBA championships and a Finals MVP. And then finally, we have Magic Johnson, who I don't think I have to go into too much detail about because I'm pretty sure many of you all are aware of him. But if not, Magic throughout his career was a 12-time All-Star, 10-time All-NBA performer, 3-time regular season MVP recipient, led the league in steals twice, led the league in assists 4 times, and is a 5-time champion as well as a 3-time Finals MVP recipient. With that resume, Magic is not only easily the most accomplished point guard in NBA history, but he's also one of the more accomplished players that the league has ever offered as well. And oh yeah, did I fail to mention, he was 6'9". Because of his size, not only was he able to dominate the game in more areas than your stereotypical point guard would be able to, but also his impact and influence in the game expands way wider than just at the point guard position. Due to his height and size, while still having the skill set to dribble and pass just as well as anyone else in NBA history, Magic was able to prove that it is acceptable to have taller players handle the ball and initiate the offense. Because of this, players and offenses became way more diverse and complex, and the baseline skill set for players across the board increased significantly for the following years. But after 1995, something changed. For the next 10 years, the influence that point guards used to have started to diminish. Now, I'm not saying there weren't any great point guards between 1995 to 2005, because of course there were. Players such as Penny Hardaway, Jason Kidd, Steve Nash, Stephon Marbury, Steve Francis, and of course you have Gary Payton, who was not only the first, but to this day is still the only point guard in NBA history to win a Defensive Player of the Year award. So the talent still was there, but again, the influence that point guards used to have on championship caliber teams just wasn't seen anymore. Long gone were the Magic Johnsons, Isaiah Thomases, and Walt Fraziers, and here are the Kenny Smiths, Ron Harpers, and Derek Fishers. So what happened? Well, first, the NBA was heading in a direction that just wasn't favorable at all for smaller players. Teams were playing at an extremely slow pace, defenses were physical and more complex than they had ever been, and more importantly, there were just rules set in place that allowed teams to marginalize point guards. This would eventually become painfully obvious for some of the higher ups in the league office, and they would eventually implement rules that would change the NBA to be a bit more perimeter oriented. However, the full effect and impact of those rule changes wouldn't occur until post 2005. And another problem that the point guard position faced was this new perception of how the position was supposed to be played. Like I stated earlier, in the previous 15 years, the concept of being a pure point or a pass-first point guard became popular, to the point where if you veered from that ideology, you were heavily scrutinized. And then you had this new term, a combo guard, that was utilized to depict players that certain organizations had a hard time defining. An inch or two taller than the average point guard, but possibly an inch or two shorter than a stereotypical shooting guard. But yeah, you can still make the same decisions and great passes that you would expect at the 1 position, but then you also scored just as well as certain players at the 2 guard. So you're a combo guard. Now in today's NBA, being a combo guard is viewed in a positive light because it does show us a level of versatility that you may not be able to find at the guard spot. However, back then, being labeled as a combo guard was negative, and a few players like Chauncey Billups have openly admitted that being labeled and showing that level of versatility as a combo guard held them back early on in their careers. However, change would soon come, and it would arrive expeditiously. And a lot of that has to do with one team led by one iconic point guard, and that's Steve Nash. Once the NBA fully committed to changing the league with a slew of rule changes that included the elimination of illegal defense, putting a limitation on how long a player could stand in the paint and back down to the basket, but more importantly, taking a more serious approach to removing hand checking, the brain trust down in Phoenix believed that there was a style of play that they could implement that could take the league over. Iconically, from 2005 to 2010, the Phoenix Suns ran an offense that was way ahead of its time, and Nash was quarterbacking it. An offense that was not only structured around the point guard, but also pushed the pace and introduced a level of spacing that the league had never seen. And even though the Phoenix Suns and Steve Nash never won a championship nor made the finals, Nash went from an elite level point guard to an all-time great one once he made the transition to Phoenix, as he became a two-time MVP recipient, a perennial All-NBA and All-Star caliber player, and immediately put his name in the conversation as one of the best point guards in NBA history. And even though, yes, I give a lot of flack to Steve Nash, I will openly admit he played a huge role in saving the point guard position, because honestly, I don't know what was going to happen moving forward. But because of his contributions for the next 15 years, the point guard position has been the greatest it has ever been. The level of influence, versatility, impact that has been seen at the one guard has been astonishing. Players such as Deron Williams, Chris Paul, Rajon Rondo, Russell Westbrook, Derrick Rose, just to name a few, has not only helped push the position, but also helped push the NBA in the right direction. The league is more diverse, the skill set is way more complex, and honestly, I believe the NBA is just way more entertaining because of it. And for the first time since the late 80s, elite level point guards played major roles on championship caliber teams. First, you had Chauncey Billups, who, despite the obstacles he faced in the early stages of his career, led the Detroit Pistons to 2 finals appearances and won the finals MVP in 2004. Then you had Tony Parker, who played a massive role in extending the Spurs run all the way to 2014. And also won the finals MVP in 2007, not as a pass first 10 assist point guard, but as a scoring guard. Then you have Russell Westbrook, who's an all-around player, can impact the game in scoring, rebounding, and assist, that helped an OKC team become relevant, made the finals in 2012, and won an MVP in 2017, becoming the first player since Oscar Robertson to average a triple-double. And of course, we have Stephen Curry, who not only is a 2-time MVP, the first unanimous MVP recipient, a 6-time All-NBA performer, and a 3-time NBA champ, but easily, Curry's greatest influence derives from the fact that he is an amazing shooter. And to be a bit more specific, when it comes to Curry's ability to space the floor out with his long-range 3-point bombs, very similar to Magic Johnson, Curry's influence is much broader than just at the point guard position. Because with the range that Curry has displayed, it has not only introduced a complexity of offense that people were afraid to acknowledge just 5 years ago, but it has also fundamentally changed the way the game of basketball will be played forever. So what's next? Honestly, I don't know, nor do I even really want to look that far into the future. Right now, the point guard position is so overwhelmed with talent that I honestly don't want to look too far into the future and overlook the greatness that I'm witnessing right now. So again, I really don't want to look that far into the future, but if I have to, I would argue that a player like Stephen Curry probably won't exist 10 years from now. It seems like more teams are being a little bit more open and experimental with who they are claiming to be their ball handlers, and so they're just allowing anybody to really bring the ball up. And just the thought of having a better ball handling Giannis on the court is really scary. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. And of course, I know for a fact a lot of people love these type of videos, so please make sure you hit the like button, try to push this up in the YouTube algorithm, and hopefully this video will do just as good as the last. Speaking of which, if you didn't see my evolution of the center position, I'll have it up on the screen. And also, I did my top 10 point guards list as well, so make sure you go check that out. And please don't forget, click all the links in the description. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.